The silence within the grand ossuary of the Valari conclave was not merely the absence of sound. It was a physical weight, a crushing pressure that pressed against the sensory organs of every delegate present, threatening to suffocate the ancient lungs of the galaxy's most esteemed potentates. Here, in a chamber hewn from the fossilized remains of a leviathan that had swum the startides before the first sun was kindled, the fate of the Orion arm was being decided not with the roar of cannons, but with the scratching of styluses and the terrified whispers of the immemorially powerful. High Counselor Thaler, his carapace polished to a shimmering obsidian sheen that reflected the dim, bioluminescent moss clinging to the vaulted ceiling, looked out over the assembly and felt a profound, sickening shame coil in his gut, colder than the void between galaxies. The great holographic star map in the center of the pit, usually a vibrant tapestry of trade routes, cultural exchanges, and shifting borders, was now marred by an encroaching darkness, a creeping red stain that represented the entity, the nameless, faceless armada that had emerged from the intergalactic gulf, consuming systems with the dispassionate efficiency of a viral pathogen. The debate had raged for 3 standard cycles, a circular, frantic argument that had stripped away the veneer of diplomatic courtesy to reveal the raw, shivering terror beneath the skin of the elder races. The decision had been made, though the words had not yet been formally spoken into the record of ages. One by one, the great empires, the crystalline harmonic collectives of the Xylo, the brutal yet honor-bound war castes of the Crag, the fluid, mercantile guilds of the Ons, had all reached the same horrific conclusion. Survival required isolation. They would withdraw. They would activate the planetary phase shields, the solar system cloaks, and the dimensional bastions. They would close their doors. They would abandon the trade lanes, the minor colonies, the uplifted species who had no such defenses, and they would lock themselves in the dark, hoping the storm would pass over them and devour only the unprotected. Thaler's own people, the Valeri, known for eons as the keepers of galactic law and the arbiters of interstellar morality, were the architects of this retreat. It was Thaler who had drafted the resolution, his hand trembling as he encoded the syntax that would effectively sentence billions of lesser sapients to extinction. He watched the representative of the Terran Union, a bipedal creature of soft flesh and short lifespan named Ambassador Kalen, standing alone on the lowest tier of the podium. The human looked absurdly small against the backdrop of the towering alien dignitaries, his suit of synthetic weave wrinkled, his face marked by the shadow of exhaustion, yet his eyes, those binocular predator eyes, burned with a calm, terrifying intensity that unsettled Thaler more than the approaching armada. "The resolution stands," Thaler announced, his voice amplified by the acoustic properties of the bone chamber, sounding hollow even to his own hearing membranes. "The conclave acknowledges the impossibility of victory against the extragalactic threat. To preserve the seeds of civilization, the highborn races shall initiate the Great Withdrawal. All fleets are recalled to home systems. All gates are to be sealed. We mourn the necessity, but we accept the logic of survival. The session is closed." A murmur of assent, heavy with guilt but buoyed by relief, rippled through the gathered thousands. They were safe. They were cowards, but they were safe. Thaler waited for the human to shout, to beg, to weep, or to rage against the dying of the light. That was what the younger races did. They screamed when the end came. But Ambassador Kalen did not scream. He did not even flinch. He merely adjusted the cuffs of his jacket, tapped a command into his data slate, and looked up at Thaler with an expression that was not anger, but a profound, piercing disappointment, like a parent looking at a child who has failed a test of character. "The Terran Union notes the decision of the conclave," Kalen said, his voice unamplified yet carrying clearly through the sudden, stunned quiet of the hall. "We understand that you have chosen to survive as islands in a dead sea. You believe that walls will save you. You believe that by closing your eyes, the monster ceases to exist." He paused, looking around the room, making eye contact with the warlords and the sages who refused to meet his gaze. "Humanity disagrees. We do not believe in walls. We believe that a galaxy of tombs is not worth inheriting. You have closed your doors. Very well, lock them tight. Bar the windows. Hide in your cellars." Kalen turned his back on the High Council, a breach of protocol so severe it drew a gasp from the Xylo delegation, and began to walk toward the massive exit archway. Over his shoulder, he delivered the F. Inal words that would haunt Thaler for the rest of his life. "The Terran Union will not withdraw. We will not cloak our worlds. We will not recall our fleets. If the galaxy is to die, it will not die in the dark. We will stand in the open. We will hold the line you have abandoned. And when you finally open your doors again, if there is anyone left to greet you, it will be us." The heavy thud of the doors closing behind the human was the loudest sound Thaler had ever heard. The conclave dissolved into chaotic murmuring, rationalizations flying back and forth like panicked birds. "They are mad," the crag warlord grunted, though his mandibles twitched with something resembling respect. "They are a young species, barely out of their gravity well. They do not understand the scale of the enemy. They will be vaporized in the first hour." Thaler wanted to agree. He wanted to believe that the humans were simply foolish, suicidal primitives driven by an evolutionary defect that favored aggression over prudence. But the memory of Kalen's eyes lingered. There was no madness there, only a cold, mathematical certainty. The humans knew they were outmatched. They knew they were technologically inferior. And yet they had chosen to walk into the fire while the gods of the galaxy hid in the shadows. Thaler felt a compulsion he could not resist. He activated his personal transport link. He would not hide. Not yet. He had to see this. He had to witness the death of the human race, if only to prove to himself that his cowardice was wisdom. The transition from the opulent safety of the conclave to the raw vacuum of the border territories was jarring. Thaler's stealth frigate, the Silent Witness, slipped into the system known as Terminus 4, a desolate junction of hyperspace lanes that marked the outer boundary of what was once civilized space. This was where the enemy would come. This was the choke point. And this was where the humans had gathered. Thaler expected to see a chaotic scramble, a desperate, disorganized attempt to flee, or a pitiful line of primitive cruisers waiting to be slaughtered. What his sensors revealed made his breath catch in his throat. The humans had not just brought a fleet, they had brought a civilization. The space around the gas giant of Terminus 4 was thick with metal. Thousands of ships, ranging from sleek military destroyers to converted freighters, mining barges, and orbital habitats, were arranged in a formation that defied all standard military doctrine. They were not spread out to minimize casualties from area of effect weapons. They were packed tight, interlocking, forming a physical wall of titanium and composite armor that stretched across the primary hyperlane exit vector. They were building a shield, not of energy but of mass. They were welding their ships together. Thaler watched on his tactical display, mesmerized and horrified, as tug drones moved asteroids into the formation, anchoring them to the hulls of battleships. They were constructing a reef in the ocean of stars, a fortification made of their own vessels and the debris of the system. It was madness. It was suicide. A single high-yield plasma lance from the approaching entity armada would incinerate thousands of them in an instant. Yet the energy readings coming from the human formation were steady. There was no panic on the comms channels, only the terse, clipped chatter of engineers and tactical officers coordinating the assembly of this monstrosity. "Observation," his ship's AI chimed, its voice devoid of emotion. "Terran energy signatures are fluctuating. They are shunting power from life support and propulsion to unknown emitters." Thaler zoomed in. Along the leading edge of the Great Wall of ships, massive industrial arrays were being deployed, devices that looked like mining lasers repurposed for something else entirely. "What are they doing?" Thaler whispered to the empty bridge. "Do they think mining tools will stop a Type 3 civilization?" The answer came not from his AI, but from the void itself. The fabric of space at the edge of the system began to tear. The entity had arrived. It did not emerge as ships. It emerged as a dislocation of reality, a writhing, chaotic storm of geometry that hurtled ships of impossible design, black, jagged shards that absorbed light into the system. The sheer scale of the invasion force was paralyzing. The sensors screamed as they tried to quantify the tonnage. It was a tide of death, a tsunami of destruction that had washed over 1,000 worlds, and standing against it was a jury-rigged wall of human scrap. Thaler closed his eyes, waiting for the flash of annihilation. He expected the humans to fire missiles, to launch fighters, to scream defiance. Instead, the human wall went silent. Every light on every ship extinguished. They went cold. The pale tide, as the galaxy had come to call the enemy, paused. The aggressive AI of the enemy fleet seemed confused by the lack of active R. Assistance. Then the signal went out. It wasn't a weapon. It was a broadcast, a simple, unencrypted transmission on all frequencies. It was music. A slow, mournful, orchestral piece, heavy with the resonance of stringed instruments Thaler did not recognize. The adagio for strings, though Thaler did not know the name. The music washed over the system, carrying a data packet embedded within it. The packet contained the coordinates of every civilian refugee fleet the humans had evacuated from the minor worlds, directing them away from the battle. It was a declaration: "We are here. We are the distraction. Run." And then the trap sprung. The mining lasers the humans had deployed were not weapons. They were gravity anchors. The humans activated them simultaneously. The effect was catastrophic for both sides. The artificial gravity wells seized the leading edge of the pale tide, yanking the sleek relativistic warships out of their supercruise and slamming them into the physical reality of the human wall. The impact was silent in the void but visually apocalyptic. Human ships crumpled like paper, thousands of lives snuffed out in a microsecond as they absorbed the kinetic energy of the enemy charge. But the wall held. The momentum of the invasion was arrested. The enemy fleet, designed for high-speed strafing and energy warfare, was suddenly trapped in a brutal, close-quarters brawl within a debris field of the humans' own making. They are brawling, Thaler breathed, unable to comprehend the tactics. The humans were not fighting a space battle, they were fighting a trench war. Boarding pods launched from the shattered hulks of human cruisers, drilling into the hulls of the superior enemy vessels. The humans were flooding the enemy ships with atmosphere and soldiers, fighting room to room with magnetic rifles and sharpened steel. It was primitive, it was barbaric, and it was working. The pale tide, accustomed to fighting graceful, energy-shielded empires that retreated when outmatched, had no protocol for an enemy that threw its own broken bodies into the gears of the war machine. Thaler watched a Terran dreadnought, its bow completely sheared off, ram a second enemy cruiser, firing its maneuvering thrusters to pin the enemy against an asteroid, while point defense cannons chewed through the sophisticated alien armor at point-blank range. The sheer attrition was horrifying. For every enemy ship disabled, 10 human ships were destroyed. But the humans had brought millions of tons of mass. They were trading blood for time, and they were doing it with a calmness that chilled Thaler to his core. He tapped into their tactical network, bypassing their crude encryption. He expected screams. He heard coordinates. He heard damage reports delivered in flat, monotone voices. Starboard flank collapsing. Rerouting power to containment. Tell the Fifth Fleet to plug the gap. We are venting atmosphere, sealing decks 4 through 10, continuing fire. Collision imminent. It has been an honor, long live Terra. There was no bravado, just the terrifying industrial application of sacrifice. As the battle raged, hours turning into cycles, Thaler realized the true horror of the situation. The humans weren't winning. They couldn't win. They were dying, all of them. The wall was disintegrating. But they had halted the advance for 12 standard hours, 12 hours in which the refugee convoys of the minor races, the ones the Conclave had abandoned, had managed to slip into the dark between stars, escaping the slaughter. The humans were spending their entire species to buy a head start for strangers. Thaler felt a crack in his carapace, a stress fracture born of his own internal pressure. He looked at the comms panel. He could call the Conclave. He could show them this. He could show them that the primitives possessed a strength the elder races had lost eons ago, the strength to die for something other than self-preservation. "Open a channel to the Terran flagship," Thaler ordered. "Sir," the AI warned, "that will reveal our position to the pale tide." "Do it," Thaler snapped. "If they are dying for us, the least we can do is let them know they are watched." The connection hissed and snapped, then stabilized. The face of Admiral Kalen appeared. He looked worse than he had in the council chamber. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, and the bridge behind him was a ruin of sparks and smoke. He looked at Thaler, and for a moment the human seemed surprised. Then a grim smile touched his lips. "High Counselor," Kalen rasped, "come to watch the fireworks." "I came to witness," Thaler said, his voice trembling. Why do this? You cannot stop them. You are throwing your people into a meat grinder." Kalen wiped the blood from his eye. "We know we can't stop them here. This isn't the victory, Counselor. This is the delay. We bought the galaxy a day, maybe 2. "But you are dying," Thaler shouted, losing his composure. "You are extinguishing your future." Kalen leaned into the camera. "We almost destroyed ourselves once, Counselor, on our own world. We spent centuries killing each other over dirt and ideology. We learned a hard lesson. Survival isn't about the one, it's about the whole. When we looked at the stars, we promised that if we ever got there, we wouldn't be the monsters. We would be the shield. You closed your doors. You decided some lives were worth more than others. We decided that if we have to burn to keep the lights on for everyone else, then we burn." The transmission cut as a massive explosion rocked the Terran flagship. Thaler stared at the static. He sat in the silence of his stealth ship, the shame burning hotter than a star. The Valeri had ruled for 10,000 years. They had built wonders. They had conquered disease. But in the face of death, they had become nothing. The humans, dirty, short-lived, and violent, had become giants. Thaler made a decision. It was not logical. It was not sanctioned. It was human. "Disengage stealth," he ordered. "Charge the singularity drive." "Sir," the AI queried, "that is a violation of the Great Withdrawal Protocols. We will be exiled." "We are already exiled from honor," Thaler said. "Target the enemy command ship. Calculate a collision vector. Probability of survival is 0. "I know," Thaler whispered. "Broadcast the sensor logs of this battle to the Conclave. Force it onto every screen in the Empire. Let them see. Let them see what courage looks like. And tell them the doors are open." The silent witness, a vessel of exquisite Valari engineering, dropped its cloak and accelerated. It did not have the weapons to scratch the enemy paint, but it had a singularity core, a contained black hole used for propulsion. Thaler overrode the safeties. He didn't aim for the fleet. He aimed for the flank that was crushing the human line. As his ship screamed toward the enemy, Thaler saw the human ship's pause, noticing the new contact. He hoped Kalen saw him. He hoped the human understood that he was not alone. The detonation of the singularity core was silent, a sudden, violent sphere of absolute darkness that swallowed 3 enemy battleships and the silent witness instantly, tearing a hole in the enemy formation. The shockwave of gravity gave the humans a reprieve. The Terran line, faltering and broken, surged forward into the gap Thaler had created. Back on the Valeri homeworld, the Great Hall of the Conclave was thrown into chaos as Thaler's final transmission overrode the system. The image of the burning human fleet, the Wall of Sacrifice, played on the giant holographic sphere. The audio of Kalen's speech echoed through the chamber. "We decided that if we have to burn." The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of awakening. The Valeri Emperor, a being who had not moved from his throne in a century, stood up. His many eyes scanned the assembly, seeing the shame reflected in every face. "The primitives," the Emperor rumbled, his voice like grinding stones, "have shamed us. They fight with scrap while we hide with gods. Open the armories." The order cascaded through the Empire, then to the neighboring empires. The Xylo saw the data. The Crag saw the battle. The shame was a contagion, spreading faster than the fear had. Back at Terminus 4, the battle had entered its final, fatal phase. The Aegis of Sol, Kalen's flagship, was drifting. Life support was failing. Kalen sat in his command chair, watching the pale tide regroup. The humans were spent. There were no more ships to throw into the grinder. They had held for 18 hours. It was enough. The refugees were safe. "Admiral," his ops officer whispered, "sensors detecting." Massive hyperspace ruptures, multiple signatures, too many to count. Kalen closed his eyes. "Reinforcements for them. We did our best." "No, sir," the officer's voice cracked. "Not them. Look at the IFF." Kalen opened his eyes. The space behind the human line, the space leading back to the civilized galaxy, was lighting up like a supernova. Portals opened, thousands of them. Gold, silver, violet, emerald, the colors of the great empires. The Valeri Armada emerged first, sleek, beautiful, and deadly, their weapon ports glowing with the light of vengeance. Then the crystalline shards of the Xylo, the heavy dreadnoughts of the Crag, the Own spheres. They didn't just arrive, they positioned themselves in front of the wreckage of the human fleet. They formed a new wall, one of energy and advanced matter. A hail came through to the Aegis. It was the Valeri Emperor himself. "Terran Commander," the ancient voice boomed. "You may stand down. Your watch is ended. You have taught us a lesson in duty that our archives had forgotten. Pull your survivors back. The Conclave will take the line." Kalen slumped in his chair, the adrenaline crashing out of his system, leaving him shaking. He watched as the full might of the galaxy, united for the first time in history by the example of its youngest member, unleashed hell upon the pale tide. The enemy, confused by the sudden escalation from scrap metal brawling to high-tier energy warfare, began to falter. But the story did not end with victory. As the combined fleets pushed the pale tide back, crushing their ships and driving them into the dark, a signal burst from the retreating enemy command vessel. It wasn't a surrender, it was a warning. The humans, with their penchant for intercepting everything, caught it first. Weeks later, after the debris was cleared and the Alliance of the Open Door was formally signed on the ruins of Terminus 4, Kalen stood on a medical balcony overlooking the reconstruction. He was a hero now, a legend. The humans were no longer the primitives, they were the shield bearers. But Kalen was not celebrating. He was holding a datapad, staring at the translation of that final enemy signal. A Valeri High Admiral approached him. "The celebration is beginning, Kalen. The galaxy honors you. We have driven them back. The tide is broken." Kalen looked up, his face pale. "Is it?" He handed the pad to the Valeri. "We deciphered their final log, the pale tide. They weren't invading us." The Valeri frowned, reading the text. His eyes widened. The translation was rough, but the meaning was clear. "Obstacle encountered. Indigenous resistance heavy. The great silence pursues. We cannot stop. We must run. We must run." "They were running," Kalen whispered, looking out at the stars. "They were fleeing something else, something worse." The Valeri looked at the human, the fear returning to his alien heart. What could scare a species like that? What could make them run? Kalen turned back to the window, his expression hardening into that same stoic resolve that had held the line at Terminus. "I don't know," he said softly, "but whatever it is, it's coming, and this time we won't be fighting it alone." The camera of history pulled back then, revealing the galaxy not as a collection of isolated sparks, but as a single burning forge. The fleets were repairing. The technologies were merging. The humans were teaching the Crag how to be stubborn. The Valeri were teaching the humans how to be precise. The doors were open, not because the danger had passed, but because the residents of the galaxy had realized that the only way to survive the night was to face it together. Deep in the void, beyond the range of sensors, a shadow moved against the stars. It was vast, it was silent, and it was hungry. But as it looked toward the Orion arm, it did not see a scattering of fearful candles. It saw a fire started by a species that refused to close its eyes. And for the first time in eons, the darkness hesitated. The reconstruction of the Aegis of Sol became a symbol, not just of Terran resilience, but of the new galactic order. It was no longer purely human in design. Valeri gravity sails adorned its flanks, and xylo-crystalline logic cores hummed within its servers. It was a hybrid, a bastard child of necessity and unity. Kalen walked its decks, the prosthetic leg the Valeri medical tanks had grown for him clicking softly against the deck plates. He felt the weight of the new title they had forced upon him, Strategos of the United Front. It was a heavy mantle, one he hadn't asked for. He preferred the honest simplicity of a captain's chair, the binary nature of us versus them. Now the us was complicated. It involved politics, cultural misunderstandings, and dietary restrictions that made mess hall logistics a nightmare. But it was better than the alternative. The Council had reconvened, not in the dark ossuary, but on a massive orbital station built by human engineers above the Valeri homeworld. It was made of glass and steel, transparent, open to the stars. There were no shadows to hide in. The debate today was not about retreat. It was about the great silence referenced in the Pale Tide's logs. "We must send probes," the OWN's representative bubbled through his translation collar. "Deep range, we need eyes in the intergalactic void." "Probes are slow," the Crag Warmaster grunted, slamming a fist on the table. "We need picket fleets. We need to expand the perimeter. We must attack the darkness before it attacks us." Kalen listened, letting the voices wash over him. He was waiting for the analyst report from the Human Intelligence Division. They had retrieved the black box from the wreckage of the Pale Tide's command ship. The xenolinguists and cryptographers had been working on it for weeks, trying to piece together the history of the enemy they had just defeated. His data slate pinged. It was Dr. Aris Thorne, the lead xenoarchaeologist. "Message, Admiral, you need to come to the lab. Now, bring the Valeri, bring them all." Kalen stood up, silencing the room. "The analysis is complete," he said. The room went dead silent. "NT, follow me." The lab was a sterile white room filled with holographic displays. In the center lay the charred remains of the Pale Tide's central processor, a jagged lump of unknown alloy that seemed to absorb the light around it. Dr. Thorne, a woman whose eyes were red from lack of sleep, stood by the console. She didn't salute. She just pointed at the display. "We thought the Pale Tide were nomads," Thorne said, her voice shaking. "We thought they were a locust swarm, stripping systems for resources. We were wrong." She tapped a key. A star map appeared. It wasn't the Orion arm. It was a different galaxy entirely. Andromeda? No, further. M87. "This is their home," Thorne said. "Or it was, look." The simulation sped up. The galaxy in the image began to go dark, not star by star, but sector by sector. Entire arms of the spiral were snuffing out. "It's not a weapon," the Valeri Emperor whispered, having squeezed his massive frame into the lab. Stars don't just go out. They do if something wraps around them, Kalen said, realizing the scale. Dyson swarms. No, Thorne corrected. Not swarms, a single entity. The Great Silence isn't a fleet, it's a biological megastructure, a mold, a fungus on a galactic scale. It infests a star, feeds on the fusion output, grows and spreads to the next. The pale tide. They were the antibodies. They tried to fight it. They failed. They ran to us not to invade, but to find biomass to replenish their numbers so they could keep running. The image on the screen zoomed in on the edge of the darkness. It was moving at relativistic speeds, and it was heading toward the Milky Way. Calculated arrival? The Crag Warmaster asked, his voice losing its usual bravado. Based on their flight path, Thorne said, the pale tide was the Vanguard's wake. The Silence is, maybe 50 years out, maybe less. 50 years, a blink of an eye for the Valeri, a lifetime for a human. We cannot fight a galaxy eater, the OWN's representative whimpered. We must build arcs, we must go to the Magellanic Clouds. And when it follows us there? Kalen asked. When it eats those stars, where do we go then, the edge of the universe, until there's no light left anywhere? He looked at the alien leaders. He saw the old fear creeping back in, the instinct to close the doors, to run. No, Kalen said. We don't run. The pale tide failed because they fought it alone. They failed because they were a monoculture. They thought the same, fought the same. The Silence adapted to them. He gestured to the room. Look at us, we are a mess, we are chaos. The Crag fight with honor, the Valeri with precision, the humans with whatever is handy. We are unpredictable. A biological superorganism relies on patterns. We don't have a pattern. He walked to the star map and zoomed in on the terminus sector. We have 50 years. That is not enough time to build a fleet to match it, but it is enough time to build a trap. A trap for a Star Eater? The Valeri Emperor asked, skepticism warring with hope. We don't kill it with guns, Kalen said, his mind racing, the human capacity for insane, lateral thinking taking over. We poison it. Poison? It eats energy, Kalen said. It feeds on order. Fusion is ordered energy. We need to feed it chaos. We need to weaponize the only thing we have that it doesn't. Which is? Instability, Kalen smiled, a predatory baring of teeth. We're going to turn the terminus line into a subspace minefield. We're not going to wall it out. We're going to let it take a bite. And when it does, we're going to detonate the hyperlanes. The room was silent. Destroying hyperlanes was theoretically possible, but it would shatter the substructure of space-time for parsecs. It would turn a sector into an impassable reef of dimensional rifts. It would sever the Orion arm from the rest of the galaxy forever. It was an amputation to save the body. It will cost us the Eastern Fringe, the Valeri Emperor said softly. Thaler's home system is there. It will, Kalen nodded. It will cost us colonies, it will cost us trade routes. It is a terrible price. He looked at the gathered species. But the alternative is the dark. The Terran Union is willing to sacrifice our outer colonies for the plan. Are you? The Crag Warmaster looked at the map. A warrior sacrifices his hand to save his throat. The Crag agree. The OWNs bubbled assent. The Valeri Emperor closed his many eyes, then opened them. Thaler gave his life to open our doors. We will not close them again. We will burn the bridge to save the castle. The Valeri agree. The next 50 years were not a golden age. They were the age of iron. The galaxy transformed into a fortress. The alliance of the open door became a military junta of necessity. Every species was drafted. The humans, with their short lifespans and high adaptability, became the officers and the engineers. The long-lived races became the archivists and the strat. Edgists, they terraformed dead worlds into weapon platforms. They turned gas giants into fuel depots. And they built the poison. Project Gorgon, a series of massive hyperspace shunts buried deep within the crusts of planets along the Eastern Fringe. When activated, they wouldn't just explode. They would invert the local physics, turning gravity repulsive, turning fusion cold. It was science that barely made sense, stitched together from the frantic theories of 5 different species working in tandem. Kalen grew old. His hair turned white, his skin papery. He wouldn't live to see the arrival, he knew that. He was building a gun he would never fire. On his deathbed, surrounded by a multi-species honor guard, he spoke to his successor, a young Valeri named Vorian who had been raised in a Terran academy. Don't hesitate, Kalen whispered, gripping the alien's clawed hand. When you see the shadow, don't wait for it to speak. Don't try to reason with it. It is hunger. You are food. Remember that. I will hold the line, strategos, Vorian promised. No, Kalen smiled, his eyes dimming. Don't just hold it, make them choke on it. When the Great Silence finally arrived, 48 years later, it did not come with a roar. It came as a dimming of the stars. The constellations of the eastern fringe simply vanished. The observers on the New Aegis saw the data streams die. Vorian, now the High Admiral, stood on the bridge. He wore the Terran uniform cut to fit his carapace. He looked at the encroaching void. It is here, he said. The silence was larger than they had predicted. It wasn't just wrapping stars. It was weaving a web between them, a physical structure of dark matter and biological horror that spanned light years. It reached for the bait worlds, the systems they had left populated with automated drones broadcasting signals of high energy and civilization. The silence took the bait. It extended tendrils, massive filaments of darkness wrapping around the poison worlds. It began to feed. Wait, Vorian ordered. The crew, a mix of human, crag, and Xylo, held their breath. Let it digest, let it connect fully. The tension was unbearable. If they fired too early, they would only hurt a limb. They needed to hurt the heart. The sensor officer, a human woman, spoke. Connection established. It's drawing from the core shunts. It thinks they are reactors. Now, Vorian said, activate Gorgon. The universe screamed. It was not a sound, but a psychic and physical shockwave that rippled through the hyperspace network. The shunts activated. The physics of the eastern fringe inverted. The gravity wells of a dozen stars suddenly pushed outward with the force of a big bang. The hyperlanes, the veins of the galaxy, shattered. The Great Silence, connected intimately to these systems, recoiled. The feedback loop traveled up its tendrils, shattering its structure. The biological matter of the entity couldn't handle the sudden inversion of physical laws. It tore. Visible light returned to the fringe for a moment as the entity burned from the inside out. The backlash severed the massive dark matter web. The limb of the Galaxy Eater that had reached into the Milky Way was amputated, dissolving into chaotic energy. The main body of the silence, still deep in the void, pulled back. It had touched fire. It had tasted poison. For the first time in its billion-year existence, the Predator felt pain. The recoil was catastrophic for the Alliance. The shockwave destroyed the sensor arrays, crippled the fleet, and silenced the comms. But as the systems rebooted, one by one, the picture cleared. The stars of the eastern fringe were gone, replaced by a swirling nebula of chaotic energy that no ship could ever traverse, a scar on the face of the galaxy. But beyond the scar, the darkness was retreating. It was moving away. It was changing course. It was heading for the void between galaxies, seeking easier prey. Vorian slumped against the console. We did it. The bridge erupted in cheers, a cacophony of roars, clicks, whistles, and shouts. In the aftermath, the galaxy was changed forever. The eastern fringe was a no-man's land, a memorial to the sacrifice. But the Alliance remained. The closed-doors policy was struck from every law book. The new Galactic Charter, written in 5 languages, began with a single phrase. In the face of the dark, we do not close our eyes. We stand together. Humanity, the species that had arrived last, the species that was too aggressive, too reckless, too primitive, had not conquered the galaxy. They had done something far more dangerous. They had united it. And on the surface of Terra, in a quiet garden dedicated to Kalen Vance, a statue stood. It wasn't of a human. It was of a door standing wide open with a sword planted in the threshold. The inscription read, "Here lives the species that chose to war for peace. To the stars that watch us, you are welcome here, but leave your darkness." At the door. The centuries rolled on. The Alliance expanded. They sent ships to the Magellanic Clouds not to flee, but to warn. They found other survivors, other refugees of the silence. They built a coalition that spanned not just an arm, but a local cluster. The Valeri forgot their arrogance. The Crag channeled their aggression into protection. The humans remained the glue. They were the restless ones, the ones who always looked at the horizon and asked, "What's next?" And when 1,000 years later, a signal came from the other side of the universe, a desperate plea from a galaxy under siege by a new threat, the Council did not debate. They did not vote on isolation. the descendant of Vorian, a hybrid of genetic engineering and cybernetics, stood before the assembly. "We have received a distress call," he said. There was no fear in the room, only a grim, professional determination. "Open the gates," the High Chancellor of Terra said. "Warm up the engines. It seems someone else needs a shield." The fleets of the Milky Way, now a force of terrible power and beautiful unity, turned their prows toward the deep dark. Every empire had once closed their doors, but because one species chose to war for them, the doors were now open forever. And through those doors marched the guardians of the light, ready to set the universe on fire to save it. The camera lingers on the fleet as it jumps, a streak of brilliance against the infinite black. The story of survival was over. The story of guardianship had begun. The humans had taught the galaxy the most important lesson of all. Fear is a reaction, courage is a decision. And the decision had been made. End of record. Epilogue: The Keeper's Journal. Deep within the archived memory banks of the Valeri homeworld, a personal file was discovered millennia later. It belonged to Thaler, the High Counselor who had died in the first battle. It had been transmitted in that final burst before his ship impacted the pale tide. The audio file played, a whisper from the past. "Look at them and I do not see gods. I see creatures of mud and blood, terrified and fragile. They shake when the guns fire. They weep when their friends die. They are not built for this, and yet, that is why they are greater than us. We, the immortals, forgot that life is precious because we had so much of it. They, the ephemerals, treat every second like a diamond. They fight not because they are strong, but because they love the light too much to let it go out. If we survive this, if my people live. I hope they learn to be human." The file ended. The young student listening to it, a being of energy and light, looked out at the thriving, chaotic, beautiful galaxy. "We learned, Thaler," the student whispered. "We learned." The student turned off the console and walked out into the sunlight of a world that should have died, but chose to live. The sky was full of ships, trade, and noise. It was messy. It was loud. It was glorious. It was human.